Chapter 4. Beyond the Dust. I cannot believe that I am about to say this, but this past week hasn't been unbearable. My 3 musketeers have helped the days pass by. Because of them, I no longer have to sit and eat lunch alone. The guards allow them to join me at my massive table. Over our meals, I have learned about their past lives. Both Ralph and Robert are veterans, which comes as no surprise given how they carry themselves. Jake, on the other hand, was abducted while walking late around his college campus. Poor kid. He hasn't even had a chance to live his life yet. I also learned that he could understand quite a bit of the Manadiet language. He explained to me that the dialect of our captors is structurally similar to the Norwegian language. He even taught me 4 words, the easy ones. I am planning to use them today as a surprise for Robert. Yesterday, he asked if I would perform a song for them at lunch. I wasn't entirely sure why he wanted me to sing right there in the middle of the courtyard, but I am game. It has been a while since I've used my voice. "Ruth," Ralph said gently, stepping up to the entrance of my cell, drawing me away from my thoughts. "Yes, Ralph, how are you doing?" He had a calm look on his face, but at the same time his eyes looked deeply worried. "I am okay," he said, pausing for a moment. "But, can I ask you a question?" "Yes, of course. Come on in." He walked into the cell and sat down next to me on my cot. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sensing the heavy gravity around him. "Yes, everything is okay. I was just wondering, are you married?" I let out a sudden, hard laugh. "No, I am definitely not." "Do you have any children?" he asked. "No, I never had the chance," I answered softly. "I am sorry to hear that," Ralph said, his voice laced with genuine sadness. I looked at him closely, seeing the profound weight on his face. "Ralph, what is wrong?" He smiled, a gentle, bittersweet expression. "I am just happy that I have met you, Ruth. But I hate that it is under these circumstances." He reached out, grabbed my hand, and held it tightly. This was the very first time he had touched me. He had always looked and glanced my way from afar, and I knew deep down that he wanted more, but not here, not like this. To break the sudden, awkward silence, I asked him a question of my own. "Well, what about you? Do you want children?" I asked. "Here?" he asked, looking surprised. "No," I explained with a small smile. "I mean in general, in a normal life." "Yes, I would love to have children," Ralph said, his eyes taking on a distant, hopeful demeanor. "I always wanted a son. I would name him after my grandfather, Cicero." "Now that is a name," I said sincerely. "I think your grandfather would have been incredibly proud." He gave my hand one last squeeze and began to walk out of my cell. "Ralph," I called out, stopping him in his tracks. "I don't think we are ever going to make it back home." I had been thinking about it for the past few days, but it hurt so much worse hearing the words out loud. He turned back to look at me and smiled. "Maybe not, Ruth. But if we don't, we will just have to learn how to make a home right here. Me, you, Robert, and Jake. We have each other." A few hours later, during lunch, my 3 musketeers were acting strangely. They were a bit more jittery and tense than normal. Even the guards seemed anxious, rushing around the perimeter. I wasn't entirely sure what was going on. "We would love it," Robert said suddenly. "I would absolutely love to hear my song now, Ruth." He moved his metal plate to the side and gave me his complete, undivided attention. Even Jake turned around in his seat to look at me. I could feel the nerves starting to tighten in my throat. Seeing my hesitation, Jake gave me a brilliant smile. "You've got this," he cheered. I took one last sip of my water, took a deep breath, and stood up from the table. Standing center stage in the dusty courtyard, I began to sing a song I had written specifically for my friends and my new family. "The dust on your path is a shroud for your souls, and you've played your part in these impossible roles. The steel is too heavy, the armor feels like skin. Close your eyes, weary hearts, and let the quiet in. Dream of a hearth where the fire doesn't burn to kill, where the night is a promised, and the wind is finally still. No banners to carry, no shadows to chase, just the soft, quiet rhythm of a long-forgotten place. The road has been gray, and the wait has been long. But listen, I'm here, and I will bring you this song. Find the still, find the light, the glory is gone, and you can leave the fight. Break the blade, unbind the seal, let the earth rise beneath your heel. I don't want your blood, I don't want your fame. The world doesn't need to remember your name. Dere drar yem, dere finner Fred, dere har betalt for deres shell. You are going, you are leaving, nothing left but the pull. Jem, fur liset dur. The final note resonated through the cavernous canyon, echoing off the iron structures and stone walls. When I finally opened my eyes, the entire courtyard was frozen. The men, the other alien prisoners, and every single guard were staring directly at me. The courtyard was silent. For a terrifying second, I wondered if it was bad. But before the panic could set in, the massive guard wearing the loincloth and combat boots threw his arms into the air and bellowed out a roaring cheer. Yem! Yem! Instantly, Robert and Jake jumped to their feet, clapping wildly, and the rest of the human prisoners joined in, filling the mines with a deafening round of applause. I may not be standing on the grand stage of an opera house back on Earth, but in this nightmare, this would do. But as I smiled through the roaring commotion, my eyes swept across the crowd. My heart hitched. I caught sight of Ralph quietly slipping back into the mass of prisoners from the far edge of the trench structure. Where in the world was he just coming from? The adrenaline from the performance faded fast, replaced by a cold, sinking knot in my stomach. The guards were still buzzing, mimicking the Norwegian words I had sung, but my eyes never left Ralph. He was wiping sweat from his forehead, his clothing dusted with a fresh layer of dark grit that hadn't been there when we sat down for lunch. The bell rang, signaling the end of the rotation. As the prisoners began to file back toward the tunnels, I didn't head straight for my quarters. Instead, I stepped directly into Ralph's path, cutting him off before he could disappear into the crowd with Robert and Jake. "Ruth," Ralph said, stopping short. He tried to offer that same calm smile he always gives me, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "That was beautiful. You really brought the house down." "Don't do that, Ralph," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. I crossed my arms, looking him up and down. "Where were you?" Beside him, Robert stiffened slightly, and Jake suddenly looked very interested in the dirt by his boots. "I was right there, listening to you sing," Ralph said smoothly. Too smoothly. "You're a terrible liar," I countered, stepping closer so the passing guards wouldn't overhear us. "I saw you slip back into the courtyard from the lower trench structures right as I finished. You weren't at the table. Robert and Jake were acting like live wires before I stood up, and you looked like you were walking to the gallows. What is going on?" Ralph sighed, the heavy soldier's posture returning to his shoulders. He looked at Robert, who gave a sharp, reluctant nod, and then back to me. He grabbed my arm gently, steering me away from the main flow of traffic into the shadow of a massive iron support beam. "You're right," Ralph whispered, his eyes scanning the courtyard to make sure the guards were still distracted. "I wasn't at the table. I was down in Sector 4 overloading a cooling conduit valve." My heart made a terrifying flip. "A cooling valve? Sabotage? Ralph, if they catch you doing something like that, they'll kill you. Why would you risk that just to play mechanic?" "Because we're running out of time, Ruth," Ralph said, his voice dropping to an urgent, razor-thin whisper. He reached out and took both of my hands, his grip tight and grounding. "We didn't want to scare you before you had to sing, but the timeline changed. Warlord Van isn't arriving in 2 weeks anymore. He found out you were here. He's coming to claim you, and his ship breaks the atmosphere in 6 days." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The red sun suddenly felt blindingly hot. 6 days. "He's coming for me?" I choked out, the panic clawing at my throat. "But how does sabotaging a valve stop a warlord?" "It doesn't stop him, but it keeps him here," A new, entirely unfamiliar voice murmured from the dark recess of the support beam behind us. I gasped, stumbling back a step, but Ralph's grip held me steady. From the deep shadow of the iron structure, a man stepped forward. He wasn't a giant Krigere, but he wasn't human either. He had sharp, lethal eyes, long brown hair, and twin daggers strapped to his back. "Ruth," Ralph said quietly, keeping himself between me and the stranger. "This is Trogon. He's an assassin, and he's the one who helped us realize we have a fighting chance." Trogon stepped fully out of the deep shadow, his gaze fixing onto me with an icy, unreadable intensity. The sheer lethality rolling off him made my pulse race, but the fear quickly gave way to a desperate need for answers. "An assassin?" I repeated, looking from Ralph to the stranger, my voice trembling but defying the urge to break. "If you're a mercenary, who is paying you to be here? How much is a warlord's head even worth to someone like you?" Trogon paused, a faint, bitter phantom of a smile touching his lips. "I am not a mercenary, human. No one has paid me a single coin for this." Slowly, deliberately, he reached up to the fabric covering the lower half of his face. He unlatched the tactical seals and pulled down the mask, stepping completely into the dim light of the corridor. I caught my breath. Beneath the mask, his features were distinctly alien, but it wasn't the standard uniform look of our captors. His skin wasn't the bright, abrasive apricot color of the grunt guards, nor was it the deep, polished rust of the elite officers. His skin was a striking, deeper burnt orange, darker, weathered, and etched with faint, elegant cultural markings along his jawline. You're one of them," I whispered, taking a half-step back. "You're a Manadiet." "I am," Trogon said, his voice dropping into a solemn, heavy register. "But I am from a lineage that Warlord Van spent a decade trying to erase from existence. I am the true, rightful heir to the high sect of the Manadiet people." Ralph and Robert exchanged a sharp look, while Jake leaned in, hanging on every word. "Before Van took the mantle of warlord through blood and tyranny, my family ruled this world with honor," Trogon explained, his eyes burning with a dark, ancient grief that made him look completely human for a split second. "Van wanted the throne, the military expansion, and the labor camps. He saw our peace as a weakness. 20 years ago, he brought his dreadnoughts to our fortress. I watched him execute my parents. I watched my world turn to ash." He closed his eyes for a moment, the muscles in his jaw tight. "My adoptive father rescued me and raised me in hiding," Trogon continued, his hand resting tightly against the hilt of his twin daggers. "He begged me to let the past die, to just find a way to live. But I couldn't. I spent my life turning my body into a weapon for one specific purpose, to cut the throat of the monster who stole my family's legacy. Van thinks he is coming to Clison to claim a rare prize. He doesn't know he is walking straight into his own execution." Trogon then turned his gaze fully to me. For the first time since he had stepped out of the shadows, the cold, calculated look of the assassin softened into something resembling genuine remorse. "I must apologize to you, Ruth," he said quietly, bowing his head in a formal, respectful gesture. "Your presence here was an unforeseen variable, and my plans have forced your friends to use you. I am deeply sorry that your voice, which holds such profound beauty, had to be used as a tool for our violence. But if we do not act now, Van will take you. I will not let him destroy your life the way he destroyed my family." The silence in the corridor hung in the air. The stakes weren't just about a prison break anymore. We were caught in the middle of a royal, bloody coup. "He's coming," Jake said suddenly, his face draining of color as he leaned out past the iron beam. "Guard, walking fast from the western corridor." The heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed against the stone floor, growing louder by the second. The tranquil, post-lunch haze of the courtyard was evaporating instantly. Trogon didn't blink. With the practiced ease of a ghost, he slipped his mask back over his burnt orange skin, the seals locking with a quiet hiss. 6 days, he whispered, his eyes locking onto Ralph one last time. Keep your head down. I will find you." Before I could even register his movement, Trogon stepped backward and melted into the unlit ventilation shaft directly behind the iron girder. He didn't make a sound. "Act natural," Ralph muttered, stepping into the middle of the corridor to block the guard's direct line of sight to the recess. Robert immediately stepped next to me, lightly dusting off my shoulder as if we were just finishing up a casual conversation about the performance. The guard rounded the corner, his armor clanking menacingly. His hand rested heavily on the hilt of the plasma baton at his waist. His sharp, predatory eyes swept over the four of us, narrowing as they landed on Ralph and Robert. "Vorferer du ikke gruftne," the guard barked, his voice booming in the narrow space. We all maintained a puzzled look on our face. The guard scoffed, a low, guttural growl vibrating in his chest. He looked past the men, his eyes locking onto me. The aggression in his posture softened just a fraction, replaced by that strange, uncomfortable reverence the Krigere reserved for me. He nodded once, but then turned a harsh, warning glare back to Ralph. "Go videre," the guard ordered, gesturing sharply toward the lower trenches with his baton. "För jag låser dig inne." "Moving, sir," Ralph said smoothly, giving the guard a compliant nod. He glanced back at me, his eyes screaming a silent warning to stay calm. "Head back to your quarters, Ruth. We'll see you at the dinner rotation." Robert and Jake followed Ralph, falling into a quick, disciplined march as they headed down the corridor toward the suffocating heat of the mines. The rust-colored guard stood like an iron statue, watching them leave before turning his watchful eyes back on me. I swallowed the lump of fear in my throat, turned on my heel, and walked back toward my private cell block. My mind was spinning out of control. I had gone into lunch as a prisoner trying to survive another day. Now I was walking out as the catalyst for an interstellar assassination, with a 6-day clock ticking down to my own capture, or our escape.